All right, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, July 5th occurrence of work group meeting. Have a happy belated Independence Day to all those in the United States. And first item on the agenda is from Whitney.
Hi, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the fort. So I wanted to have a discussion around triaging issues because I'm still pretty new to Istio and I haven't had like any success in going over the open issues to find something to contribute to. So well, I'm proposing having this discussion because I'm hoping that if we pretty much do more triaging of issues, it would be easier for contributors to like contribute. Right now we have over 561 open issues. And I wanted us to like explore potentially doing triaging in the combined working group calls. I've been a part of like other SIG working groups, and usually they do that pretty successfully. And in doing it in calls, it provides like newcomers and like everyone a chance to like listen in and like learn additional technical implications around like the problem, the issue. And yeah, I'm curious to hear everyone's thoughts around like how is triaging being done now? And is this something we can do in a more collaborative way? And ways on how we can improve our triaging as well, for instance, how we can add more context to the issues so that someone can pretty much just pick it up without having to like direct message someone for like something to work on. I also came across like an issues dashboard. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. I can post a link. But so it's like a work in progress dashboard that sort of attempts to like give metrics around like open issues, stale issues, and so on. So yeah, that's what I hope to discuss today.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can throw a couple of comments on here. There is also there's also a prioritization dashboard, if you will. It's on the Istio, or I mean off the Istio thing. So think of like the ambient prioritization. We also had one that is a legacy one that was at one point set up for handling things, or at least managers can still look at it, at least for looking for issues that somebody might have tagged as a blocker. And we used to use that for some of the milestone planning. I don't know if it makes sense to resurrect that again or not. I know in the past, some of us would look at that. And what we would do is we would basically go through new issues and do a couple of things. One, verify that, the area label made sense. So in the case of test and release, if something was marked test and release, did it make sense to be test and release, and or maybe change it to something else, or add test and release to an issue that it might not have been tagged on. So we would at least do that work. Actually, the thing that's sort of missing from that process when we did it would be what Whitney is talking about here, which might be tagging it as, a good first issue or something like that. So, some things were done in the past. I think some of that probably flow has changed. And maybe that's partially due to having a combined work group and not doing it outside of that. I mean, in the case we did it, I don't know that we ever did it as part of the test and release work group process so much, but it was just something that the test and release work group leads did as part of their normal weekly work. So that's just sort of some thoughts I had on it. Certainly open for other ideas like Whitney had.
So quick poll, since I joined when the work groups already combined into a single work group. Back in the days when we had separate work groups, did the work group leads do an active triage of the existing issues and labeling them?
Test and release did. I do not know about the other work groups.
At any point in Istio history, do we have a recurring, like, all-up triage of these new coming issues?
I will make a comment that there was a period, I believe it was called Code Mauve was the name, and I want to say that was probably 3 years ago. And in that case, basically, I think all open issues were assigned to a handful of maintainers. I think every maintainer got, some certain number of issues, which they were going to go over. But part of that was to also, hey, was the issue fixed? Did it need more info? There was a lot of stuff that they were sort of, we sort of went over at that point. I don't know that it makes sense to do that whole exercise again, but some of the process behind that exercise might still be pertinent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we can find, I'm assuming a lot of that Code Mauve stuff was documented in our, Google Docs, but I'd have to go back and try to find it.
Okay, so we have, in the past, we have an existing process for tracking these issues, and I guess we just haven't been actively following them or conducting this for the last couple of years. So I'm thinking, how can we make a decision as a community on this, right? If this is, in essence, determine whether this is something that we should resurrect, and if the answer is yes, then what is the process we're going to follow, and who will be doing the triaging? Like, are we going to make this into a community-based triaging? Like, for example, this set of folks conducting in this meeting every week, which, by the way, I don't think is a good idea, because we only have this 1 hour a week, and there are plenty of other issues to discuss. And if we make this a separate, maybe even offline way of triaging this, then we should put some structure around how we're going to conduct this process. But first, let's decide on the former. How do folks feel about actually following the process and triaging these issues? So we do have a pretty sizable backlog of issues right now, and it's the goal to get those down to 0. And if not, then what is our actual goal?
I think we have to have a goal to do something with them, because otherwise people are just going to feel like they're yelling into a black hole when they open an issue, right? So I think the fact we have 560, we've got to do something with them. I mean, 0 is never going to happen, right? So I think we have to, as a community, find a way of gradually making a dent in them in a way that doesn't make everyone go insane, right? Because I've tried to do this before, and if you try to tackle too many too quickly, it just becomes soul destroying.
And do we know what the income rate is? Does it show us an income rate?
You can approximate. Obviously, Istio is the biggest, probably most popular repo. And you see each one of those has hundreds of issues open per month, assuming the data here is accurate. I have no reason to doubt that it isn't. July has had 5 days, and so far we already have 18 issues filed in July. Some of those, of course, are coming from maintainers, plotting and planning work. But yeah, it's a pretty large volume on Istio alone, as far as the issue count, or income rate, I should say.
So that tells me that the income rate, it should open by month in each of the repos. Is there anywhere that shows me the resolve rate?
Well, look, click on the next one down, open issues, and see what that shows. No.
This page is under construction. So this is
I was
actually
gonna
related
say,
to that
Whitney
topic
made the comment there's 500. when you made the count, there's 500 and some Istio issues open, and I want to say we're at 270 something for Istio.io as well. I mean, most of our repos don't take issues, so but those would be the two big ones.
Do we have like automation that automatically closes issues if they're not interacted with for a certain amount of time?
We do. I believe the first level is a stale bot for 30 days, maybe 14. It might be more aggressive, might be 14. And then closed after, I think it's 14, stale after 14, close after 30. So I can double check.
I was going to say, I don't recall it being nearly that aggressive, but we could look it up.
It would just be interesting to know kind of what rate, so of the issues that get closed, what rate are closed because we did something about them or triaged them and said, hey, we're not going to do something about this, and which ones were just aged out because nobody looked at them. Because if they're getting closed at decent clips, it looks like they are, right? If we've got a backlog 560 and we're opening like 400 or 500 a month, then sure, we've got a backlog to work through, but that isn't awful if we're opening 500 a month. But if they're all closing because they're aging out and no one's looking at them, then that is really bad, right? So it would just be useful to know that, I think.
Also, Eric, is the milestone planning still happening right now?
I missed the question. Is the what still at planning?
The milestone planning that you mentioned used to occur, is that still happening at all?
As far as I know, we have not done milestone planning in a while. Have we done any milestone planning since you've been here, Francis? I don't think so.
I don't believe so.
Because I'm thinking that one of the goals can be associated to the upcoming milestone if we have one, or if we want to create one, in terms of like really filtering through the issues to be released in that milestone.
Right. I mean, that was sort of the idea of the milestone plan, right? Is we would, each work group, if you will, would have, their plans for the next release. So, and it usually happen toward the beginning. So, by now we would have had, a 1.19 milestone plan in place. People would be getting, well, we're not quite to 120 yet, but then, and that sort of had your prioritized list of things, P0, P1s and things like that, that the work groups we're planning on doing with people assigned. And I mean, that was a good thing, I think. I don't know why we necessarily got away from it.
Do you remember roughly when we moved away from it? Was it just due to like lack of new features?
It was probably around this. I want to say it was probably around the same time as going to the combined work group meeting. And I recall back when we had the test and release work group meetings, we would once a quarter have our sort of planning meeting. I know Brian and I were work group leads back then, and usually him and I would sit down and come up with sort of a plan that we thought was important, and we use that priority chart that I mentioned earlier, and then so we sort of were able to say, here's the things we think were priorities for test and release. During one of our work group meetings, we would sit down and say, okay, who wants to work on what, and sort of be able to associate owners for those items that way. I think it's probably harder to do that in a combined work group meeting. So that's just part of why I think it probably hasn't happened since we went to the combined work group meeting.
Okay, so what do the folks here present think? Shall we resurrect this exercise?
I feel like if we do, it would be incumbent upon, based on what Eric's describing, it would be incumbent upon working group leads to drive a lot of this. And I feel like I don't know, from what I've seen, I've only ever been around Istio since the combined working group call, and we didn't have, when the all working groups emerged. It feels like that process made a lot of sense when you could kind of do it on a per working group basis. Does the working group still hold that same role today in Istio? And if not, then does the process need to change?
Yeah, I agree. So here's my perception that since we started the combined working group meetings, the individual working groups, other than security, which frequently have CVEs, have essentially phased out of existence. I don't, at this point, I don't even know who the work group leads are, or whether that they have done any planning aside from the Wednesday combined work group meeting, whichever topic all the topics that we talked about on Wednesday. So I see John Howard just joined. John, just to give you a recap of what we discussed. So it's about the triaging issues, triaging the, what is it, 500 something or so issues that are left in the Istio repo alone. And Eric just provided us with a history of what the community used to do to triage these issues. And it used to be driven by the work group leads. So the question that we're trying to decide now is whether this is something we should resurrect. And if so, then how do we proceed going forward?
Got it. Well,
and the one thing I want to add to that is, so Whitney's original question, I think, was to how do we triage issues? But I think one of the things that she mentioned of getting out of it was, when we're triaging them, marking some that would be good community first issues, or, and that people could look at to try to find, as opposed to, trying to read through issues and figuring out what might be good. So as part of that triage effort, that was part of it.
In my experience, most triaging during meetings is just some poor soul opening GitHub issues and looking at silence and then going on to the next issue a minute later after silence. Or people just trying to check the box and posting not useful comments on the issue. So I've never seen it executed well in the past when we did it. It doesn't mean it can't be done. But I think having a call where we've just forced everyone to show up and we all stare at the issue board has never proven to be effective in my experience. So.
Yeah, agreed. So let's get back to the goal of the exercise. So sounds like getting to 0 issues is neither a goal nor practical. So can we rephrase the goal as what Whitney has actually proposed before, which is to flag issues that are great for newcomers to get our feet wet? Keith?
I also want to add that there are a couple of other goals of triage. Yes, helping newcomers to start contributing is one, as Whitney pointed out. But I think in general, like for a healthy project, we need to be able to see, how high a priority is this user reported issue? Is this something that's actually an issue, or is it user error? And if it is an issue, when do we want to accomplish this? This just needs to happen in this release, for example, right? There's a whole, it's more than just calling out good first issues. It's also, let's make sure that the bugs that customers, or not using customers, but like users are reporting, are being addressed and planned for, and from a community perspective, resourced to make sure the product continues to move forward.
I mean, I would agree with that statement that Keith had, that, you know, it would be good to have, you know, the additional stuff done as well. Although, you know, at least prioritization wise, I think, I don't know if you can necessarily pick when something might get worked on, just because you don't necessarily know, you know, who's going to be able to work on it, and, you know, how quick something can be gotten to. But at least priority wise.
I also want to add that I've been in triaging meetings where there was a lot of value that came out of pretty much like really taking each issue seriously and attempting to provide as much technical context to it as possible, even if it's like giving the background story, updating the descriptions, pointing to like different like areas in the code base that this might affect. Even if it's just one person in the call that has that knowledge, I think it would be a great learning experience and could potentially be recorded and added to our library as well. And if there's more than one person that has an opinion, that's even better, where we can have like actual discussions and collaborations.
So going back to my original question, as a community, how do we make a decision on this? To whether to, well, one, right, whether to start triaging, because we do have a sizable backlog. And two, if so, if the answer is yes, then in what format, in what, and what, who will participate in it, how we're going to conduct this triaging. Because there are evidently, right, there are methods that are not very helpful, not very effective when it comes to triaging these issues. And we should find a way that make this exercise bear fruit and achieve the goals that we set. So let's come to that first question, right? How do we decide as a community? Is it just a matter of casting a vote here? Is this a matter of, hey, let's, like, is this something that the TOC needs to decide?
I don't think voting or TOC, like, we can't tell people to do things, so people need to volunteer that they want to do this, right? I mean, unless you're a manager of people, then you know to do it. But I can't vote to make Whitney do it, for example.
Okay, so I think find the people, if I gather you correctly, John, then find the people who are willing to do this, and then this essentially, we can make it happen.
And I think one of the persons has to be a maintainer or someone that has a lot of context to actually add value.
Is this something that we can add to the release manager responsibilities to an extent? Would that make sense?
I think we need experienced folks to run this. We need at least one experienced maintainer to run this, but I'm not sure if release manager is the right person for that.
Oh, I don't mean to run it, but to have some responsibility to contribute and help out.
So Calio, what are you thinking specifically?
Because usually as a release manager, you're looking at issues a lot anyway, especially during like cherry picking time, and you kind of have an idea of what are, like, you know, you're the one writing the release notes, you know, kind of what's going on. So I just think there's already like a knowledge that release managers have that they can help out with. But John, what are you thinking?
Oh, sorry, I was responding to Eric's comment, but I mean, I think it would be good. I know the release managers also have a lot of burden, so if they don't want to, I don't want to force them upon this. But if they do want to, it sounds great. I mean,
yeah, I think there is some time between like when the release starts and when branch cutting starts, where I think it would be reasonable. Paul, what do you think? Because you just completed the whole process.
I mean, yeah, like you say, it's very quiet for about 2 months and then it goes nuts. Like, I found it so bursty. was my experience with it. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. There is some time at the start. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a release manager is a great idea because release manager, I mean, I believe steering and TOC are forcing every single company to become release manager. So that really helps having this rotation notion of having people step in to triage issues, which is great.
Yeah, that was going to be something that I was going to say something similar. Like, I kind of disagree with what John said earlier. I think you can force, quote unquote, force people to do things, but the way you force people to do things is by making it the responsibility of their role. For example, maintainers should, quote unquote, be forced to review code. It should be, forced their requirements and then their responsibilities that are part of your role. And so I think, release manager is a great place to do a lot of the triage work. Based on what Eric was saying about the previous process, it sounds like, what's the word? Working group leads also had a good bit of responsibility as far as the triaging, prioritization, things like that within their particular area of the project. So I think you've got the infrastructure, for lack of a better term, to have accountability, to have process for some of these things, and we have a way to enforce it when it comes to working group lead responsibilities or maintain responsibilities. But we just have to figure out what the best place to inject the responsibility is.
Do we still have work group leads? Are the work groups still work groups? I guess this is my question. Since we've been operating under this combined work group setting for at least 2 years.
Well, my comment to that would be yes. Do we necessarily meet? No, but at least from a PR approval standpoint, right? Being a maintainer in test and release doesn't give you the authority to approve a networking PR, for example. So there are still groups of people that review, related sets of PRs. Whether they actually meet and you'd call that a work group, I leave that up for somebody else to say, but I would say yes. The work groups still exist. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the work group leads are still work group leads. And like I said, I like Keith's idea of being able to say, certain roles have to do certain things. And, if it's, work group leads, help triage, and I'd have to go look at the roles document. It may actually say that. And maintainers should have some role as well. But I do like the idea of, having a separate triage meeting, and it could be run by release managers and at least have work group leads invited, as well as anybody else who wants to show up. I don't want to, as John would say, force people to show up for, a nonverbal meeting. But if there are people who want to triage them, I would say that would be a good idea.
I would be more than happy to work on this during my quiet time until it explodes, as Paul mentioned. I would just need to work with someone who is more experienced and ingrained in the community. But I guess I'm saying, if I showed up to the meeting, it's not going to be a quiet meeting.
So here's my couple of thoughts. And by the way, thank you, Kalia, for essentially volunteering on this. I agree. We do need at least one, if not more experienced folks to be part of this triage meeting. And also, just looking at the backlog, the fact that we have several hundred issues, it's gonna take a long time for any one group of people to go through all of them and triage them. So instead, I would say, even triaging new issues, right, on a monthly incoming basis, that's a lot of work. Ideally, I would like to to, key off on Keith's idea, to make it the responsibility of the work group and the work group leads to triage things in their area, and maybe for RM just be the traffic director of directing these issues to the right work groups. Because I've been in these triage meetings in the past. In a 1 hour meeting, you'd be pretty lucky to go through 20 issues. And when we have hundreds of issues to go through, that's, as you can imagine, that's going to take a lot of time. So John has to go through every issue every year, so it doesn't take long as you think. John, what's the average? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you consider, I don't know, 8-hour day, that's like 500 minutes. We have about 500 issues. So if you spent a minute per issue, you could get through them all in one day. It'd be pretty quick. Like, I mean, I'm a bit faster because I have more context and because a lot of issues are old, so I've already seen them and I already know what they're doing. So obviously I can go through them faster. I think when I first did it, I was new to the project and there was like 2,000 issues and it took a very, very long time. But there's actually, like, I know it's easy to look at the 500 issues and think that most of them are probably things that can be cleared up right away, but there's actually probably easily 300 issues that are kind of hard to get rid of. Now maybe we say, hey, look, if there's an issue that we haven't tackled in 5 years, it's closed, even though it's a valid issue, and we kind of change how we handle issues. Sure. Mm-hmm. But I'm always shocked by how little we were able to trim down the issue list when I do it without being too aggressive. Now there's always, like, if you look at the last like 2 months of stuff, there's always a bunch of cruft, but once you get past kind of the newer issues, the older ones are pretty sticky, I found. So
for the sticky ones, do we just need to get it to the right work group and have them work it out?
I mean, it's stuff like, hey, we should implement active health checking or something. And it's like, maybe we should do that. It's probably a massive effort. It's a huge API change. No one's really pushing for it. It's been an open request for 5 years. Do we keep it around as kind of a back of the backlog or close it because no one wants to do it right now? So far, we've just been keeping it on the back of the backlog, which maybe is not the strategy we want. But if we're not going for 0 issues as kind of a goal, then maybe it is what we want, right? So I would tackle really like new issues and old issues kind of a bit separately. Like the new issues, absolutely, you can bust through them. There's a bunch of things that are people asking questions that don't belong. That's just user error. That's just trivial bug fixes, things like that. If we focus on those, I think we'll make a lot more progress than older ones. And obviously also, you can continue to do new issues every month or so. There's new issues keep coming up. That may be more effective. Like every month we review the last month of issues, or every week or every day you review the last day. Like I tend to just pop up the GitHub issues and look at what's new since I last saw it and take a quick glance at them. And sometimes I just close them because but sometimes I do other things to them, so.
Okay, yeah, then Keith. Kalia, you had your hand up?
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm unmuted. Thanks. I feel like the perspective that I've noticed in this conversation is about clearing the issues, and I'm wondering if instead, because when I think of issue triage, I don't necessarily think of getting them assigned, getting them finished, clearing the backlog. Not that 0 is going to be the goal, but I think of if I open an issue, I know the status of it and I know the context for it and I know who's responsible for it. Keith, care to opine?
Oh, once you're done, go ahead.
Oh no, I am opening up to discussion.
Okay. Yeah, so I completely agree with that. I think what John said about kind of an immediate effort to get through some of the newer issues, I think makes a lot of sense. But I do think there's also a sense in which going through the old issues and making it so we know what the status is when you open it up. It shouldn't take me but 5 or 10 seconds to open up an issue and know, is this in the back of the backlog, or is this something that needs to actively be worked on? If it's a good first issue, et cetera. So either have like a, maybe using labels more as not planned or backup backlog, or like having, a board with it saying like it's the bottom of the backlog or something, having priority labels, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of ways to put that data there. But like if we're doing this repeatedly, we want to have a way, we want to make it so that we're not having to go through the same exercise of the same issues over and over again. After we go through all of the issues once, we shouldn't have to go through that back 200 again, because we know where it is. And if a working group wants to put forth the effort to implement active health checking, for example, then they can decide to put forth that effort. But if we still want to decide to the back of the backlog, we can know that that's where it is at a glance.
So agreed. I think those are actually two separate things. Triage, let's just agree on terms. Triage means new issues, right? When a new issue comes in, information is still new, it doesn't have any of these labels or prioritization, that's the triage process. And we need to get on top of that process, because otherwise the backlog becomes unmanageable. You just have a tangled mess of hundreds of issues that has not been looked at. And then there's the actual scrubbing of the backlog. The scrubbing of the backlog, if done correctly, we should only have to do that once, or maybe once a year, if that. And it's really to go through the backlog to make sure the things are properly labeled according to the process. And to Keith's point, that we, by glance, just know where the thing's at, what priority is at, whether it's something that we need to work on for the next release, and so on. And then we can, at the beginning of the release, start taking these items from the top of the backlog. Okay, so then come back to this, right? The backlog pruning, I think, John, you've been doing it on a one-off basis, like once a year or so. Let me ask the question in a way. Do folks here feel like there's a pressing need to go through the backlog again and do the scrubbing and pruning at this point? I'm taking that as a no. So then
sorry, lost the mute button. I would say that from project-wide perspective, it's probably not terribly useful to look beyond 3 months or so. As someone onboarding to the project, if you have quite a bit of time, I think it is kind of useful to see the 500 outstanding issues of the project to give some kind of context of what users are experiencing, where the issues are, and whatnot. It's an expensive way to get context, certainly, but it's something to keep in mind. I found it very useful when I was onboarding, but certainly from the project perspective, I think focusing on the last few months is good.
Okay, so so I'm hearing like we basically, even for pruning and scrubbing, we can focus on just the last quarter sort of issues. So then for triage, we should get into a process of focus on the new issues. And I think this is something that RMs can definitely drive with assistance from experienced maintainers. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Does the community doc or the community repo have a list of working group leads, so we know who the service managers know who to contact?
I have seen this doc before.
Yeah, there's a doc out there on work group leads.
Okay, so if we agree that this triaging new issues, focusing on triaging new issues is a process that we should get started, then let's get working on it. So Kalia, you are the 119 release manager, as on an experimental basis, how would you, what do you think will be an effective process to get this started? Like some kind of meeting like this, but rather than using this specific meeting for it, a one-off with the work group leads, or one-off where you're driving with the with another experienced maintainer like John?
I'm open to whatever suggestions people in this room have regarding like work group leads versus like a couple of dedicated members like Eric or John or others. But I agree that a separate meeting, at least a one-off to start and kind of figure out what the process will be, would be helpful. I don't think it's too important to solidify the process right now, just to kind of start feeling it out. The only thing with RM driven is that there has to be the expectation that the RM can like step back and take care of actual release manager duties first.
So this is essentially during the
execution period.
Right.
But then I guess I would like to kind of have buy-in from at least a couple people in this room before we schedule that meeting.
So in terms of buy-in, we'll need to, we basically just, if we're going to do this with experienced maintainers, then we need the experienced maintainers to buy in to actually attend this meeting.
Yeah.
Let's see, who do we have on call today? Any takers?
I can join.
I can do that.
All right. John and Stephen. And well, we have two already. Do
I can help
we
certainly as well.
think let's not make it, everyone's time is precious. Let's not make it too big of a meeting.
Yeah, I think this is a great start for people. We can share screen, go through the issues, give it a try informally.
And is there a way to, I'll look for it, a way to look at the just the new issues that needs triaging?
What do you mean, Francis?
I was wondering whether there's a way in GitHub to already have a query that marks all the new issues so we don't have to go through existing issues.
I don't think there's anything that marks something as like someone triaged it. I mean, some other projects have like literally a triaged label. We don't have that. But you can do all sorts of things like, you know, obviously sort by age. I've also sorted by least recently updated. So you see some issue that hasn't had comments for like 3 years, probably not useful anymore. Things like that. We could probably start for the first one, just start with the newest issues and work backwards, I would imagine. Okay. You can pretty quickly see if there's been some maintainer discussion or if there's 0 comments. You can also sort by least comments too. So you can find all the ones with no comments, which have almost certainly not been, you know, correctly triaged. At least someone may have looked at them, but probably every issue should have at least a comment of what the next steps are. Either we need more info, thanks for the bug, we should fix it, you know, things like that.
And Eric, you said there's already a triage process document in Google Docs somewhere, right?
My comment with that was related to what we did for Code Mauve. So in that space, yes, we probably did have some instructions. Because like I said, back then, we basically, and we don't want to do this again, But what we had done then, and what we could maybe inherit part of, is basically all the maintainers were assigned a set of issues, and there were some instructions in the code mob document that said, basically, you're to look at your issue. You might mark it more info needed. You might say this is already fixed. You might say some other things. So that part of the doc is probably somewhere.
How about this? If you can find that doc, can you forward to me? And based on that, I will propose a set of a triage process and a set of labels and so on. So that way we can tweak the process during this round of triage, and then we can then continue going forward. So that way we don't have to keep on reinventing the wheel again. For the very least, right, let's figure out how to mark issues as triage and what queries to go look at them and so on. Yep. I think you might have missed that last part I said.
Yeah, I clicked on a wrong tab.
Okay, as I was just saying, if you could forward that doc to me, I will create a proposed set of triage process, and then we can tweak that process as we go through the triaging these issues.
Yep, no, that sounds good. I will try to look for that.
And so I'll devote some time later this week to go work on that. Let's aim for that first new issue triage meeting sometime next week. And Kalia, I can work with you to go set it up.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. So, okay, so we took almost 1 hour to discuss this issue. Do folks have other issues to discuss?
I have one just small comment. There's been some suspicious GitHub activity, mostly in other repos than our repos. If you see anything that looks weird, don't do the OK to test comment and send a message to me or anyone else that's on the security group or any TOZ members, anyone really, even if you're not sure, just to be safe. So.
When you say suspicious activities, do you have an example? And it's not in our repo, meaning in other open source repos?
Yeah, other open source repos that are adjacent to us. I don't want to give too many details just in case, but doing things that are suspicious in the pre-submit tests and kind of trying to access secrets and whatnot.
Okay. Secret exfiltration. Oh, I see.
Yeah, I didn't want to make a huge noise about it in a different group, like Slack announcement or something, because I don't want to encourage people to go do to be the suspicious people. But yeah, I figured this was a good group. So.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, folks? All right. If not, you all have a great day and hope to see you in the ambient meeting. All right. Bye, folks.